Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. Welcome to the Gaming Daddy channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. So Friday, we're going to go back and talk a little bit more about the division, kind of looking back at where the game was and how far it's come. And, in my opinion, where I believe, the Division 2 is going right now. We might even jump all the way back to the Division 1 because a lot of things are pertinent to that time. And for those of you who've spent a lot of time in the community, I'm very certain that, it's been a long haul. You guys have been here. Many of you have had multiple life changes, and across the board, you've shared those life changes with people you've met in the community. Sometimes the division has been a portion of those life changes. And it's just been one of those things that's kind of been, there. I mean, if you want to compare the division is for many people like another relative, if you get what I mean. I mean, however it is, the relationship is you have with the game, it's just I think one of the better analogies I can use is that the division feels like a relative of yours, whether it's a love relationship you have with that relative or a not so loving relationship or a mixed relationship in terms of love hate. That's what some people have, I would say in a sense portrayed to me. That is their own categorization of Tom Clancy's The Division 1 and The Division 2. Now, if you were to maybe look around, maybe go back a little bit, you'll see that The Division 2 really did have some sort of a struggle in its launch. And one thing that I usually argue for is how The Division never really got a lot of the credit that it did deserve. Some people in the community, like I've already mentioned, their only aim and goal is to always make sure that The Division can never ever celebrate any detail. If anybody dares venture celebrates that, they jump into troll mode and start talking. Now, yes, some other community members will give very strong criticisms, but even they understand that it's pertinent to celebrate the things that are wins regarding the division and the Division 2. So wins will be the division basically survived through the barrage of multiple video game releases. It survived through all the perception and all of the analyses, or I would say much more than analyses. Let's just say the expectations that it would most likely die out in the face of other video game releases. So one thing that was really interesting was I remember when the Division 2 was released. It released around the time of Anthem, and even at that time there was a lot of mixed feelings in the community. Anthem promised all of these things and turned out to be not any of them. Anthem is no longer going to be supported, even though it came out just a month before the Division 2 came out in February of 2019, while the Division 2 came out in March of 2019. And the Division 2 is here right now, and we have content that we're waiting for being developed by another Ubisoft sister studio to that effect. So that's something that I say is a thumbs up. Ubisoft has one thing that they really do well. I mean, with all of their problems, which they have many. Have you seen the Twitters lately? Ubisoft's issues seem to be coming to light again. They do one thing very well, which is sticking with their games. And I think that is one consumer, I wouldn't say consumer friendly, I would say consumer mandated thing that they do that really does work out for the consumer. And I wouldn't say consumer friendly because consumer friendly practices, I don't know if Ubisoft has necessarily taken a lot of time to evaluate its consumer friendliness in a while. So let's just leave it at that. And so, the division thrived, even though it had its issues. It had a lot of lag time and downtime. It seemed like the development team were not necessarily way more hands-on in the development of the game like they were in the first game. But I think now a lot of things are coming or becoming much clearer, like the raids, being given to other studios to develop, and the other missions and other DLCs and other extra free, in quote, content that was also developed and actually, I would say, built from other studios actually putting in the work to get that content to us in the community. So this is something really cool. You move on further down the road, The Division came out as one of the top 10 games released in 2019. And I have to give that credit to where that credit is due, because I would say I would say most played game, which is Mortal Kombat 11, came out a month after the Division 2, and that game was in the top 5 of the best games, or I would say kind of more relevant games that came out in 2019. And so I usually give that credit to the Division 2, even though I know in the face of this, there could be arguments saying, well, 2019 didn't have a lot of big games. To that, I say, man, get that out of here. I mean, in reality, why didn't anybody release, in quote, any big games when you had a FIFA 20 in that same year, when you had all kinds of games, Resident Evil. I think there was a Resident Evil that came out that year with Capcom, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody correct me. So there were a lot of big games in that year, and there were a lot of big name games that actually showcased in the 2019 calendar. So I'm giving the credit to all of the games that were able to make it into the top 10 in that year. And even though Division, also, did not meet a lot of expectations, it was still able to make it into, that category. And then, 2019 kind of expired and 2020 came around, and we had Warlords of New York, where we had a lot of issues in the game in terms of broken mechanics and the developers handling, what they were going to do to people who actually exploited those mechanics, in terms of the way that they actually reversed a lot of their progress. Now, there's, a lot of really weird, I would say, contingencies in that. So I'm just going to say that really caused a lot of drama in the community, and it felt like the game was not going to survive. But for some strange reason, the game, people who were playing the game just continued to play the game. We eventually found out that the Division as a franchise had actually mustered about 40 million players. And even if you were to divide it at a 60-40 percentage or an 80-20 percentage, you still have a huge and a significant number of players that actually played the Division 2 and were still playing at that time. Now, after Warlords of New York, we didn't get any content. We got barely any news. We did get some extra stuff added to the game. We got some changes and some patches, and we got some balances for the PvE game, but largely the PvP game went untouched. Nothing happened, and this really set off a lot of the community, concerns about what in the world PvP was going to actually be in this game, and especially with the fact that Massive seemed to be bearing down into Avatar as a game that they were making, and also announcing that they were going to be working on a Star Wars game. This really set off a lot in the community. But, I think one thing that Ubisoft really does, and to their, I don't know if I would say to their merit, because there are some, nuances to it, is they really keep quiet about a lot of things. In the Division 1, it seemed like they were a little bit more open, but even then, they were very secretive. I think with these businesses, they have to keep their trade secrets, number one. Number two, they have to make sure that they don't commit too much, so that if they can't fulfill those commitments, they can still back out of it, just the way they actually committed to the project, the Codename Nightmare event, and then, the COVID issues hit them, and then they couldn't, move too far forward with that event, and then it became a problem. So I think things like this really make these studios shy away from even trying to bother with actually making a lot of these commitments as to what was going to go on. So they already had these things in the works. They already had some of these things being planned, and then later down the road, we started to gain and hear more information. Not to even speak up, of more other things that have been happening, which, if you wanted to kind of point them out, you look at a game like Cyberpunk 2077, which was a game that was actually hyped for, at least half a decade, and everybody kind of thought that Cyberpunk 2077 was going to bring a renewed interest to RPG shooters, to the market. But, Cyberpunk 2077 fell flat on its face because of technical issues and overambition that wasn't properly executed. Even though the development team still made a lot of money because, their share prices went up from all of the hype and all of the expectations, and even for all of the copies that people bought and didn't necessarily return because they're probably looking forward to perhaps one day, which you can say now, the game being, restored to a working and functional game, which I think CD Projekt Red is going to do a good job in, restoring their game, but they already did a poor job in the release, so that already was a big bummer. And the Division still survived that barrage. And then in April, we had Outriders. Outriders was just a single loop game, a game that did have its own issues. In fact, way more worse issues than the Division 2. I'm going to have to be very frank in saying this because I really did see the way Outriders got a lot of soft glove treatment. And I said this before. I said this is kind of frustrating. Why is Outriders getting the soft glove treatment? And I gave the game a lot of credit. I purchased a copy because I really wanted to support the developers. But then I noticed that there was a lot of soft, glove treatment to Outriders compared to the Division 2 and even compared to Anthem. Now, I can't really judge how much of the scope Anthem was compared to Outriders, but I can judge that the Division 2 has a bigger, broader, and actually better value in terms of scope when it comes to a PvE free game than Outriders did for the price point Outriders actually provided, their game, and the way they positioned it. They positioned it as a game that didn't want to be what the Division was. But at the end of the day, even if you don't want to make your game the way the Division is, you can still create a loop that's interesting to players that they can always come back to. And Outriders seem to not be able to, just strike that point for a lot of players. Been reading reports, been talking with people about it, and not many people are currently, that in my circle anyways, I can't speak for other circles outside, not many people, within my friend circle are playing. And I think that really gives me an idea as to, what's going on. And then also the renewed interest in the Division and the Division 2 is very interesting. If you look at the Xbox side of things, Xbox had kind of gotten this, Division free-to-play thing go on, where Microsoft was able to get the game and just give it to people on, I think, their subscription with the Xbox Live Gold or something like that. And then just recently, they got a 60 FPS boost, which you have a lot of Xbox Series X and S consoles available, and people have been able to taste what the Division 1 looks like at, a high, game performance, which shows you the entire city of New York, shows you the artwork, shows you the beauty of the game, and the fluidity that the game brings, which is something that, if you didn't play on PC, you never experienced it. But now you can actually get that on a console in your home, and a lot of people are just amazed. And I think this has probably, in a sense, just snowballed into people even following up and even getting themselves a copy of the Division 2. Because if you run into a lot of these missions, you start to see a lot of people with shade levels that are quite, within the 100 to 200 mark. That would tell you that they've probably only been playing for a total of about maybe 50, 60, 70 hours. If anything, they haven't necessarily gotten too far in the game. And I say 50, 60, 70 hours, even with a boost to Warlords of New York, in many cases, except they've just been farming XP like crazy. So that renewed interest has pretty much, in a sense, cascaded to this thing where people are now gaining a little bit more acceptance of what the Division has come to be. I think what we most likely had issues with for the longest time was expectations versus reality. And one thing gaming developers do, or I would say publishers and marketing teams, let's just say developers, because most developers are not in the marketing process or the decision making. One thing that they'll do is they'll probably leave fans to kind of create a lot of these expectations in their minds, because that's what's going to sell copies. If we say here right now, let's say Biomutant's coming out in the next few days, right? It's a game that's going to be published, I think under THQ. For those who know, THQ has a very weird reputation, but a lot of people will probably have these, preconceptions in their minds, but no one in those companies or no one, involved in the marketing or involved in any aspect of the game is going to tell you to temper your expectations, because they want you to be hyped. They want your expectations to be heightened so that you can make purchases of their game. And I think this is some of the things that we've seen in the past few games where a lot of the hype has kind of gone in and rolled, but now people are starting to become much more skeptic and a lot more informed in the way that they actually view any video game announcement that they see coming in the near future. And this brings us to the Division Heartland. The game has been announced. A lot of talk is going around the community, and there's a lot of excitement. Some people have said dead on they're going to wait to see. It's going to be a free-to-play game, and I think it's also going to be renewing more interest to the Division 2. In fact, I saw a comment that somebody made, on a poll somewhere on YouTube. One of our, a lot of our colleagues that are YouTubers, they take polls from time to time asking different questions about, the Division and the Division Heartland, and kind of what the community is, to kind of get a feel for what people are thinking. It's a good practice. And somebody mentioned and said, I don't really care about, what everybody is saying about Heartland. I'm going to wait for official, reveals and official revelations for me to be able to make up my mind. And I think that's one of the qualities of the Division community. And I think it's something that has actually conditioned us in this community to learn on how we approach video games. So when you look back, I would say the Division franchise has done well for itself. I would say the Division community is a very resilient community. I know we've gone through a lot, but I think it's our attitude. Yes, it may be really tough for us to be able to deal with the game. I think our attitude towards the game has pretty much kept the game alive if you were to ask me. I see comments saying, oh, the game is dead, yet I played 2 legendaries today, which is interesting that, the game is dead, but I'm playing legendary missions. I got to matchmake for the summit. I played on the summit. I didn't even jump on PlayStation today. I bet you if I jumped on PlayStation, I would have had no issues finding people to play, because constantly there are people to run missions with, there are people to matchmake with, there are people when you call for help, they respond and they help you with, activities, and all of the above. So those representations are not the reality. I think what the reality is, many of the, good old community is just waiting for new content right now. So many of us have played, gotten, and achieved a lot of the things that we wanted. In fact, some of you have everything that you want in the game, min-max builds, and so on and so forth. And that's perfect. But that your ears are on the ground, and once they announce anything about the Division 2, you're going to be picking that game up and you're going to be checking it out. So that's pretty much what I wanted to just, point out in this video. I wanted to go ahead and just lay out some of these things as, kind of the foundation that we kind of look at the Division from in many cases and in many instances. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to the video. I appreciate you guys so much. Leave comments. I want to hear your thoughts. Peace out.